Hi, I'm Unruly Anime. This is my recap for the anime, The Unwanted Undead Adventurer. If you like my recaps, please consider subscribing. The story begins as a weak but brave adventurer makes his way through a dungeon. His name is Rentt, and his mouth nearly drops to the floor when he encounters a terrifying winged monster that's ginormous and powerful. This thing looks insanely powerful, as we see that it has a mouth inside of its other mouth when it screams. Rentt has never been more terrified in his life, and he just now realizes that he will not be able to survive this encounter. The giant Pokemon-looking beast makes its way towards our hero, so he can't stop shaking. He can't believe this is happening to him, as he thought he was going to achieve his goal of becoming a mithril-class adventurer. That goal is probably going to get way harder as the beast bites down on him with all two of its mouths. Sometime later, Rentt is surprised to find that he's still alive. But that surprise doesn't nearly compare to the bone-rattling shock he feels when he sees that he is somehow just a skeleton. The disbelief rattles him to his very empty core, and he screams in horror over what he has become. A look into the past shows a time when our brave protagonist still had flesh, organs, and stuff. This guy has no clue what's coming, so he's super optimistic to start another great day as an adventurer. It's seriously early in the morning, and that is typical for adventurers, but he thinks about how lucky nobles and scholars are since they can sleep late. Waking up early is going to be the least of this guy's problems, and he explains that he's a low-class adventurer. He was born and raised in a town way too small to be on a map, and he travels through it to go get a job. These jobs are provided by the Adventurers Guild, and they're given based on an adventure-specific rank and skill. The guild probably does it this way so weak adventurers can't mess it up and get themselves killed or turn into undead skeletons. There are a ton of jobs ranging from awesome monster extermination to lame material gathering. Some boring-looking dudes call out to our boy, and Rentt explains that he will be going back to the Labyrinth because there aren't any good jobs. These lazy degenerates can't understand how Rentt can work so much, so they left and went on their way. Rentt explains that while most adventurers like to party up, he remains solo. It's not for any cool Lone Ranger type of reason. It's because he simply isn't very good. This guy's been adventuring for 10 years now, but he's still only in bronze, which is the second lowest rank. He makes a living selling stuff from cautious jobs he takes, but he is very frugal. This guy lives a pretty dull life, as he tries to be conscious of every move he makes. Well, he really screws it up, as he watched this guy walk right into the labyrinth that's going to change him forever. In this dungeon that has been thoroughly explored and completely deserted, Rentt is shocked to find a secret passageway. This is an amazing discovery, as he is likely the first person to find it, so Rentt throws caution to the wind and begins exploring it. As he walks through the area, it becomes certain that it's unexplored, so he hopes to find some valuable magical weapons. Rentt becomes excited as he realizes that he can even make a small fortune by simply reporting this news to the guild. At this point, Rentt is too dumb to notice all the obvious signs that this place is super dangerous, and he finds himself in a room where he meets his demise. We watch again as he comes face to face with the thing he calls a dragon, and he explains that it's the greatest of all monsters. According to legend, dragons take many forms, and some are considerably larger than most standard dragons. That is certainly the case for this dragon, as it seems to have just evolved into its final form. The sheer pressure exerted by this terrifying beast is enough to freeze our boy's Rentt, and he instantly realizes that he doesn't stand a chance against these dragon things. Back to the present, Rentt wonders how he is still alive after being devoured. The shocking reality hits him, and he begins to wonder if he's even actually alive, since he's very much just a skeleton. What he is, it's an immortal monster known as an undead. Sure, that sounds cool, but a bishop or priest could easily destroy him with their purification magic, since the undead are not meant for this world. Rentt is doing a lot of thinking for a guy that doesn't have a brain, and he begins to wonder if he's actually dead. He is still conscious and has his memories, so he must be alive to some extent. Unable to answer all these existential questions, Rentt decides to head back to town, but quickly realizes that doing so will only get him in trouble. He will be captured and probably executed. Rentt doesn't want to die just yet, but he confuses himself when he starts questioning his existence again. Rentt finally decides to just ignore all his problems and get out of this room as soon as possible. As he exits, Rentt explains the mysteries of the labyrinths. No one really knows where they come from or how they work. There are many all around the world, and tons of valuable treasures can be found inside them. However, monsters lurk around every corner. Everyone is busy at some new labyrinth right now, but solo adventures should be coming to this dungeon in a few days. Rentt plans to ask them for some advice on his situation, but quickly realizes that he will have to learn how to talk without a tongue. Just then, an actual skeleton monster appears, and Rentt prepares to fight his twin. He can't even really move properly as he feels so heavy, and he determines that it must have something to do with his lack of muscles and all the other stuff non-dead people have. He was pretty weak already as a human, but now it's way worse. These skeletons were actually pretty easy for him to defeat as a human, but he can't even raise his sword without falling now. Rentt freaks out as he is totally vulnerable, but the dumb skeleton is even worse than he is. Rentt realizes that he can't use any fancy sword techniques, considering he's just a bunch of floating bones. But he remembers that he can use spirit energy. Luckily, it works, even though he isn't really a human anymore, and he uses it to buff up his physical abilities. With his attack power raised, Rentt absolutely destroys his opponent's skull, but he gets shocked when the thing starts to glow. He realizes that he just recovered the spirit energy he just used and wonders what could be happening. A look into the past shows a woman teaching Rentt a thing or two about monsters. They have a mysterious trait. With time and experience, they evolve into greater things. This is true for humans as well, since they grow with training. But monsters are on another level. She uses skeletons as an example. Usually, skeletons simply remain skeletons, but on rare occasions, they evolve into ghouls. This is known as existential evolution, and Rentt gets the idea. He thinks about how ghouls are also undead, but they sort of resemble humans since they have flesh. If he can somehow become a ghoul, then all he will have to do is wear robes and masks so that he might be able to return to town without people being terrified of his boniness. Rentt finds some optimism, as his new goal now is to defeat monsters in the labyrinth and become a ghoul. Back in town, we see that Rentt's friend is disappointed that he never came, so she will just make dinner for herself. Back in the dungeon, we see that Rentt is putting in work, as he has already defeated 5 skeletons. He has gotten his mobility back and learned that life from his defeated enemies heals him. Because of it, he can use spirit energy. During every battle, Rentt decides to find some stronger monsters and finds a slime. They are still considered weak, but they are not to be underestimated. Physical attacks are not as effective on these types, but Rentt doesn't have the ability to use offensive magic. All he is capable of is starting fire, which is not suitable for battle, so he decides that he must attack with his sword anyway. There are really only 2 ways to defeat a slime, and that is either by piercing its core or by breaking it apart until it can't regenerate. After dodging the slime's attack, Rentt counters and is shocked to see that he did it. He determines that he just got lucky by striking its core, but he doesn't question his victory and takes a magic stone as his prize. He then collects the slime to be sold later since they're used as cosmetics to make ugly people less ugly. At the guild, 2 people discuss how some newbies have been looking for a party to join. They were going to recommend that she party up with Rentt, but he hasn't been around lately. The newbie was pressed for money, so a guild member recommended that she go to an easy labyrinth to find treasure and materials. She didn't know it, but this labyrinth is the same one Rentt is in. In the labyrinth, Rentt explains how he doesn't feel things like sleep or hunger, which is fine since anything he eats would probably just end up going right through his bones. He has been fighting non-stop too, but it's becoming clear that existential evolution takes a long time. His physical abilities have come back, and he can use mana too. What's most surprising is that he can still use his divinity despite being undead. In addition to curing injuries and illnesses, divinity can purify water and delay the spoilage of food. Rentt uses it to make some bread last for 3 more days, and he hopes that he will have a normal body that needs to eat bread by then. For now, he refocuses on his goal and thinks about how many monsters he can take on at once. He is a pretty conservative guy, so he decides that if he encounters more than 4 monsters, he will run. He shouldn't encounter more than 5 in this low-level labyrinth. But if he does, Rentt determines that it will be the end of him. Rentt then gets really down on himself for being weak. Even after being an adventurer for 10 years and training for 20 years, he has spirit, energy, mana, and divinity. Even the highest-ranked adventurers rarely have all three, but Rentt wishes he could have just one strong power. Usually, people like him who are not cut out to be adventurers quit. However, Rentt trained every single day without fail to try to make it work. He even asked that one girl to teach him about monsters and magic. He has continued trying in order to achieve his goal of becoming a mithril-class adventurer. It's the highest rank, and not even naturally gifted people reach it easily. At this rank, you will find those who have saved entire nations. Rentt is determined to become one, and not even being turned into a skeleton will stop him. Rentt starts taking out more skeletons and wonders if he's getting stronger than when he was a human. He eventually takes out another slime with ease and becomes certain that he's getting stronger. Rentt collects some more slime goo but stops when the light comes out of it. This time is shockingly much different than the others. As his body begins to change, muscles form all over his body, and hair bursts out of his skull. Hair, skin, and eyes follow soon after. And when the process is done, he's finally able to make some growling noises. Rentt has successfully evolved into a ghoul. He is really just a creepy, dried-out corpse, but he's just glad to finally have flesh again. This is a major step in the right direction. Most importantly, if he keeps working hard, Rentt thinks he might be able to become an even higher-ranking undead, possibly even a vampire. With now having flesh, Rentt gives his voice a try, but all that comes out is a roar. He is glad just to be able to make noise and gives it another try. He manages to say hello and good morning, but he sounds like a terrifying zombie more than anything, and he determines that it will need some practice. Sometime later, we find our flesh having protagonist as he fights some goblins. These overweight goblins are very dangerous in large groups, but Rentt uses the layout of the dungeon to isolate a couple. Rentt has evolved into a ghoul and finally has some muscle. Now he is more agile compared to when he was just a bunch of bones. However, what is most surprising is that his mana, spirit, energy, and divinity have all increased. Our boy is getting stronger quickly, as he can now not only strengthen himself but his sword as well. He does just that to separate the goblins' heads from their bodies, and wonders if he's now even stronger than when he was a human. Just that, and right here is fighting in the distance, and we see that it's the girl from the guild. This blonde chick makes quick work of a weak skeleton monster, and Rentt rejoices as it's been so long since he has seen a human. Rentt has to stop himself from approaching her as he reminds himself that he's hideous and disgusting, looking like a ghoul with skin that is barely attached to his body. If he walks to her like this, then she will surely try to end him or run away. He decides to watch her from a distance, like a half-dead creep, and notices that he has never seen her before. Rentt determines that she must be a rookie and explains that he knows practically every adventurer in the town. He knows them because adventurers can be tough people. They tend to make fun of weaklings like our boy, so it helps to know their abilities and who their friends are. Rentt keeps following her like a stalker and watches as she encounters another skeleton. He can tell that she was well trained, but she's still weak, and she needs to land a lot of hits. Rentt knows that she's waiting for the perfect time to strike, but points out that she isn't paying attention to her surroundings. This proves to be a grave mistake, as she is pinned against the wall, but she shows her resolve to become a real adventurer. She heroically fights back, but the skeleton just overpowers her. With no other choice, Rentt rushes to rescue her, and she is shocked to see a hideous ghoul. Rentt wishes she would attack the skeleton while he has it distracted, but this girl is pretty useless. Rentt just slices the skeleton in half and goes to check on the girl. Unfortunately, he still sounds like a zombie, so she freaks out. When he tries to tell her his name, Rentt makes it clear that he is not her enemy by tossing his sword, and she realizes that he's trying to talk. He explains that he is Rentt the adventurer, and she wonders if he is wearing some kind of disguise. Rentt can't even explain what really happened when he died, but he is still alive. She can tell that he is unlike the other monsters, and she thanks him for saving her. Rentt has to assure this terrified girl that he isn't going to end her life, but he does ask for help. She agrees to buy him a robe so he can return back to town, and he lets her keep the change after she does so. This girl introduces herself as Rentt, the daughter of a knight, and she promises to do this for him as repayment for him saving her. She leaves, but Rentt can't help but notice how cautious she is around him. A proper adventurer would report a mysterious ghoul like himself to the guild, but Rentt believes that this girl he just met and knows nothing about won't betray him. Back in town, the first thing this chick does is run to the guild. The guild lady from earlier was worried about her, and Rentt explains that she has an urgent question to ask her. Back in the dungeon, Rentt fights another slime and finally confirms that he is a lot stronger than when he was a human. In fact, he's not only stronger, his body now moves exactly how he wants it to. Rentt destroys yet another slime by hitting its core perfectly, and he begins to wonder if his vision is getting better as well. He assumes that it's actually combat intuition, something you can't learn from training or studying. Rentt can't help but think of the irony, as he only got the power he has always wanted most after he ended up in this rotting corpse of a body. Just then, Rentt is surprised to see that Rentt has returned. Rentt must assure her that he isn't some other ghoul and explain that ghouls don't show up on the early levels like this. She can tell that Rentt has gotten a little better at talking, and our diligent hero explains that he has been practicing. Rentt has brought him some clothes, but he gets startled when she tries to give him his change. She apologizes for still being terrified of him because he looks like he was in a bad car accident, and tells him that she will eventually get used to it. Rentt thinks she did a great job picking clothes since the robe will conceal his whole body, and it's something a maid would wear. This nice person got him some other things as well, and she explains that she had to ask someone where all the shops are since she is new to town. Aside from boots and gloves, she also brought some bandages. This chick has surprisingly thought of everything, as she explains that he can use it to cover his arms and legs. This gesture makes Rentt want to cry, but his decrepit body lacks the moisture and tear ducts to do so. Rentt puts everything on and actually looks pretty good. It's much easier to move in it all than he thought it would be, but he admittedly loses some visibility. He will still be able to fight, so he tells Rentt that it's all perfect. She makes a pretty bad move by showing him his now hideous face, but she reveals that she brought him a mask. Rentt knew his hard-to-look-at face would be a problem, so she got it for him. This mask slams itself onto his face like it knows how badly it needs to be hidden, and Rentt is shocked to find that it won't come off. They both freak out, and this dim-witted girl explains that, looking back, the shop she got it from did seem a bit suspicious. It wasn't one of the shops her friend showed her, and she bought it because it was cheap. It was only a crazy low 3 copper coins. But she explains that she did check it for curses. Nothing happened when she touched it. But Rentt determines that the mask must have a curse that activates when it's put on. Rentt is shocked to see that Rentt can use divinity, and he wonders if he can break the curse now that he has more divinity. Unfortunately, he runs out of energy, so she apologizes. Rentt explains that the mask responded to his divinity, so all he will have to do is save up some money and ask the powerful cleric to break the curse. He tries to console her, but backs away when he remembers that he is a monster. Rentt stops him, as she has come to realize that Rentt is not a bad person. She says that she isn't scared anymore, but she is still shaking. Rentt tells her that she doesn't have to force herself, and she can take her time until she's really used to him being a decrepit zombie. Rentt promises that it won't take long, and the two head back to town. On their way, Rentt explains that there weren't any jobs for rookies like herself in the capital, so she came to Malt. Rentt is still surprised that she came all the way out to the countryside, but she explains that she wants to see the world. Her main goal is to get stronger and become a full-fledged adventurer. Rentt suggests that it's better for an adventurer to be a coward like him, since everyone only has one life to live. She agrees for some reason, and he jokes about how zombies like him are rare, so they both laugh it up like it was the funniest joke ever. When they arrive at Malt, Rentt points out that a lot of people know him there, so they will surely know that something is wrong if he shows his ID. They decide to use another gate, and Rentt thanks his new friend, as he would never have gotten as far without her. She says it's not a big deal, but he explains that he is a monster, and if she helps him get into town, she will be considered a criminal. She could lose her adventurer's license, and he doesn't want to cause her those kinds of problems. This girl is determined and explains that if it weren't for him, she wouldn't be alive. The skeleton would have ended her, so she doesn't mind risking her life for him this one time. At the west entrance, their identities are confirmed as adventurers, but one of the guards has some kind of problem with Rentt's unusual appearance. The situation gets tense as they demand to see Rentt's face. Rentt brilliantly explains that Rentt's mask is cursed and he can't remove it. She then says that his voice is all messed up because he was horribly injured by a monster, and Rentt chose his disfigured ear as proof. Rentt tells them that he just bought the mask to hide his hideous guards, but it turned out to be cursed. The guards feel terrible about his awful luck, and Rentt even offers to let them pull the mask. The guard gets all the proof he needs when his feeble attempt to remove the mask fails, so he allows Rentt to enter. Rentt credits Rentt for their success, but she once again just says that it's all part of her repayment. However, just then, Rentt disappears. Rentt just watches her desperately search for him like a jerk and thinks about how she's a good kid. She wears a bunch of cheap equipment, but it's been well maintained. She is also a decent fighter and isn't that dumb. Most importantly, she is brave, so he is sure that she will make a fine adventurer. Rentt explains that anyone he knew with her kind of talent eventually left him. He must leave her for now. And when he looks a little more human, he promises to apologize to her face to face. Afterwards, we see why Rentt really left Rentt behind as he goes to see a more suitable human cooperator, someone with a bit of a past and a person who can be trusted to keep secrets. Rentt just walks into a house where he finds his very suitable human cooperator, named Lorraine. He tries to wake her up with his messed up voice, but she refuses. He threatens to drop a book on her head, so she knows it's Rentt, but she's surprised to see him all covered up. Rentt doesn't prepare her at all, and shockingly, he just shows her his ghoulish arm. A look back to just a moment ago, it shows that Lorraine was worried about Rentt and was considering having a guild send out a search party. Rentt knocked on the door, so she wondered why he didn't just walk in. She assumed that something must have happened, and she went to pretend like she was sleeping. As he entered, she thought about how relieved she was that he was still alive. Back to the present, Lorraine explained that in all her years of research, she has never heard of anyone who got eaten by a dragon and turned into an undead. Lorraine is skeptical of his entire story, but considering how disgustingly grotesque his body looks, she determines that she has no other choice but to believe him. Rentt is amazed at how calm she is, but it's to be expected from the academic mage adventurer. It's pretty clear that she isn't really looking at him as a friend right now, but more as a test subject. Lorraine then shocks him by asking if he's really Rentt now that he is undead. Rentt explains that he definitely has the memories and mind of Rentt, but his mess of a body definitely died. However, whether or not the current him and the old him are the same person, he doesn't know. Setting aside this impossible question, Rentt explains that he still wants to continue being an adventurer. His body might look like a rotting corpse, but Rentt is still determined to become Mithril, no matter what. Lorraine is a genius, and he can tell that he wants her to accept jobs for him. Since he can't go to the guild in his current state, he can't go to the inn either, so she offers to have him stay with her. As payment, she will also have him help her with her research. He will be quite valuable, since no one has ever had the chance to study a monster that can use existential evolution. Rentt agrees on the condition that she doesn't try to dissect him. The next day, Lorraine cuts out the guilt from being the middleman and pays Rentt directly for the magic stones and slime goo he got from the dungeon. It's a lot of money, but it's because Rentt always brings her high-quality materials. Rentt decides to go to the blacksmith and feels good about having a pocket full of money, but that happiness leaves when he notices that people seem to be scared of him. At the blacksmith, Rentt apologizes for his strange appearance. Using his strange voice, Rentt would like a new sword, and the blacksmith can tell from his old sword that he uses magic or spirit energy. Rentt shocks her when he reveals that he actually uses magic, spirit energy, and divinity. She points out that being able to use all three is very rare, and he is only the second such person to ever visit their store. Rentt would like for that to remain a secret, and she agrees since it's part of a blacksmith job. The owner of the shop is named Culp, and he takes a great deal of pride in his work. It will take several days to make the sword, and he will want to speak with Rentt several times throughout the process. Back home, Lorraine does research on ghouls. They have strong physical abilities and are capable of surviving even decapitation. They prefer the meat of animals, particularly that of humans. There are some known cases of powerful monsters turning humans into lesser undead, but in those cases, the victims not only lost their personalities, but also any kind of human will and emotion. Rentt is an extremely special case, and she determines that the chance that Rentt is the exact same person he was in life is extremely low. She is very close to him, and to her, he still feels like Rentt. A look back shows when they first met, and Rentt's skin wasn't falling off his body. Lorraine just took a job, and some guy asked her to take young Rentt with her. He was only a rookie, so she didn't have to pay him, and he just needed experience. Lorraine explains that the world was so boring to her, Even when she became the youngest person ever to attain the title of Great Doctor, it meant nothing to her. The title of Great Doctor allows one to register as a silver-class adventurer. She went to a distant nation without telling anyone simply because she had nothing better to do. During her job, we see that she decided to bring Rentt with her, and he did his job as a backpack carrier. She thought about how careful one needs to be when harvesting this particular plant, and got upset when she saw that Rentt picked a whole bunch on his own. Lorraine was going to scold him since he didn't know how delicate you needed to be, but she was shocked when she realized that Rentt did it perfectly. Just then, a nosy goblin appeared, and Rentt instructed her to use a certain spell. She did, and Rentt was amazed that a silver rank has magic on a whole other level. The next morning, Lorraine told Rentt that wasn't her first battle. She was only flustered because she usually has a lot of escorts with her. Lorraine then realized something, and Rentt came clean. Everyone was worried about her going alone, so they told Rentt to go with her. Rentt was once told by someone to read as much as he could about plants and monsters. He has ever since, so Lorraine asked them to teach her. He also seemed to know how to move through the forest well, so she would like to learn that too. Rentt agreed, and that's how things began. Between the two of them, he worked hard every day for the past 10 years since then with the goal of becoming mithril, and she stayed by his side doing the research she loved. Back at the shop, Rentt, thanks to Blacksmith for agreeing to make a sword, cautiously shakes the man's hand. Rentt is given a temporary sword that can use both magic and spirit energy. Culp can tell that Rentt is in some kind of trouble, and they wonder why he doesn't just come to them for help. Culp determines that he must be under some kind of curse, a real bad one that Rentt is worried might affect their shop. Rentt has never wanted to cause trouble for other people, so he was trying to hide his identity. However, the fact that he can use all types of power, along with his staying with Lorraine, helped him realize who he is. Afterwards, Rentt and Lorraine enjoy a meal cooked by Chef Lorraine. Rentt doesn't eat, however, as he doesn't get hungry. Lorraine then explains that Rentt is clearly different than any other ghoul, and it must have something to do with why he's able to existentially evolve. She wonders what Rentt will evolve into next, but he has no clue. Rentt wants to remain as close to humans as he can, so their first step will be to evolve him. This means he will have to return to the Labyrinth to fight monsters and get stronger. In the Labyrinth, some guy is getting wrecked by a slime, and Rentt arrives just in time to save him. The guy thanks him, as he can now live after just receiving a scratch. Rentt leaves immediately and thinks about how adventurers are expected to be responsible for themselves. No one is obligated to help an adventurer, and if they die, it's their own fault. In some cases, there are even terrible people who will pretend to be in trouble so they can rob adventurers who come to help them. That being said, Rentt still tries to help whenever he can. This dude he just saved can tell that Rentt is really strong, so he asks Rentt if he will let him join his party. He explains that he just registered as an adventurer, but he is actually a chef. He has a restaurant, but he is badly in debt, and he needs to repay 15 gold by next week. As a desperate and new adventurer, he was willing to do anything to join a party, but no one would give him a chance. That is why he came to this labyrinth, since it's said that it can be done alone. Rentt thinks about how that is only true and if the adventure is already kind of strong, and he decides to reject the guy. As Rentt leaves, he realizes that he might be being a little too harsh, so he lets the guy join him. The guy tells Rentt that he is dependable, but Rentt takes a long look at this guy's wound. Rentt thinks about how sometimes he gets really scared that he might not really be himself. Rentt takes this guy to the secret entrance where he became undead, but he's disappointed to see that the dragon is no longer there. More disappointment fills Rentt since there are no magic items to be found there, but they do find another hidden passage. The nameless side character thinks they could make a fortune by telling the guild about all this, but quickly backtracks and emphasizes that Rentt would get all the credit. Rentt explains that he has no interest in glory and tells the guy that he can just tell everyone that he found it. While going through the passageway, they find an empty room, so the guy wants to continue looking for some treasure. Just then, a magic circle appears on the ground, so Rentt tries to stop the guy from running right into it. This dumb guy gets some confidence all of a sudden and tells Rentt that it's okay since no monsters are around. It becomes clear to Rentt that the guy doesn't see the magic circle, but it's too late, as it teleports him somewhere. It's impossible to know where they went, but they usually lead to a floor filled with monsters or someplace with deadly traps. The smart thing to do would be to abandon this doofus, but Rentt determines that this would just make him a real monster. Rentt grudgingly decides to go after him, so he goes through the teleportation circle. There he finds the unconscious doofus along with the giant skeleton. Rentt realizes now that this is actually a boss room and prepares for battle against the giant monster. Rentt strengthens himself to land an attack, but it doesn't do anything. He realizes that the giant skeleton can't be damaged with spirit energy, so he gives magic a try, but that fails as well. The exit is gone. So this means that this is one of those rooms where adventurers can't escape until the boss is defeated. Rentt is an adventurer who never gives up, so he tries something else. His sword might not hold up from his next attack, but the skeleton is undead, which means divinity should work against it. The divinity-powered attack works, and the skeleton comes crashing down. Rentt follows it up with another divinity attack on the thing's skull, and the fight is over. Rentt patches the dumb side character up, and he's shocked to see that Rentt defeated the giant. Rentt looted a giant magic stone from it, which just proves to the guy that the monster was even more powerful than he thought. This guy thinks Rentt is incredible, and Rentt offers to let him have the giant magic stone. Rentt wants something in return, and he shows this guy his disfigured skin. He only tells him that a monster got him, but he explains that he needs him to go to shops and that he feels guilt for him. The deal still seems pretty one-sided, so Rentt has to eat and drink at this guy's restaurant for free whenever he wants. The guy thinks this is a pretty silly question since there's no question that he will let him eat and drink there for free. His restaurant won't get closed down now thanks to Rentt, so he promises to work hard to keep it open. This guy isn't able to see magic circles like Rentt can, so Rentt tells him to just walk towards the door to go home. Rentt would like to keep exploring but decides that it will have to wait until next time. The guy takes Rentt to his restaurant, where his wife is glad to see that he is safe. She is worried that her husband might be getting tricked again when she sees the giant stone. But the guy explains that while Rentt might look like some evil bad guy, he's actually a great guy. This guy finally introduces himself as Loris, and they thank Rentt for his help. Rentt hesitates to tell this guy his name, but Loris promises not to tell anyone. Rentt tells him, and Loris explains that he will have a hot meal ready for him whenever he wants. As Rentt leaves, something strange begins to happen to him. He wishes that Loris was a villain with no family because there's something he needs to test, and he would rather test it on someone evil. Rentt didn't want to get close to the guy, so that is why he never asked for his name. Rentt begins saying Lorraine's name over and over again and becomes worried when something starts taking over his body. Rentt returns home, but he is barely responding. When Lorraine tries to talk to him, she wonders if he is okay, and he simply tells her that he is happy. Rentt surprisingly embraces her, and Lorraine wonders if he is drunk. There is clearly something wrong, and Rentt shockingly bites down on her neck. Lorraine pushes him off of her, and the monstrous Rentt says that it was delicious. Lorraine can tell that the real Rentt is still somewhere inside of him, so she just knocks him out. She will allow him to sleep for now, and wait for his apology when he wakes up. Lorraine would rather he grab her like that when he is sober, since she will let him devour her anytime he likes. When Rentt wakes up, he no longer feels like something is controlling him, and he apologizes. Lorraine dismisses it as an accident and only wants to hear about what he remembers. Rentt, I remember meeting some guy in a dungeon and thinking that he looked delicious. Lorraine also looked delicious, so he couldn't help himself. Lorraine surprisingly expected this since ghouls prefer human flesh and blood. She decides that they both need to get some rest, but Rentt insists on seeing how much damage he did. Lorraine just sold all her potions, so she will have to wait till the morning to take care of the wound. Rentt isn't satisfied with that, and she wants to just heal her instead. Lorraine is amazed to see how much divinity he can use now and explains that she has never been healed by it before. She is then shocked to see that all the pain has gone away. But our boy isn't done yet, as he also gets rid of the scar. Lorraine notices that Rentt's body is changing, and it's even to the point where he can pass off his once hideous body as just having old wounds. Rentt's mask has shockingly changed shape somehow, so he realizes that he will need to hide his face. The mask changes shape once more, and Lorraine begins to wonder if it's responding to Rentt's desires. Rentt finds that he is able to control its transformation, but he still can't remove it. Lorraine isn't even able to pull it off, which is fine since he still needs to hide his face anyway. It's also easier for Rentt to speak a bit more clearly, so he wonders if his Existential evolved. This would make sense since he defeated a strong monster, but last time he evolved right after defeating a monster. Lorraine gives it some thought and, surprisingly, wonders if he evolved because he fed on her flesh and blood. This would make even more sense since he now looks less like a ghoul and more like a ghast. Ghasts are servants of vampires, and they are even weaker than the weakest vampires. Rentt wonders why his transformation is going in this direction, and Lorraine points out that the origins of existential evolution are a complete mystery even to the most knowledgeable of academics. Rentt is eager to hear her hypothesis on what's going on, so they decide not to sleep. Rentt started as a skeleton, then became a ghoul. Existential evolution is defined as when a monster transforms into a more powerful being. Ghouls aren't the only things stronger than skeletons, since there are also skeleton soldiers, skeleton knights, and lots of other things. Why existential evolution leads down one path or the other is unknown, but she infers that the monster evolves into the form that it wishes to take. Rentt kept saying that he wanted to become more human, so he became a ghoul. Rentt thinks this would make more sense if he became a vampire, since a vampire looks more human than a ghast. This is true, but Lorraine compares existential evolution to ranks in a guild. You cannot jump from bronze to gold, so she predicts that Rentt will have to meet certain conditions before he becomes a vampire. Experiments on smaller monsters have shown that the existential evolved into a form adapted to their environment. In a volcanic area, they form into something with a high fire affinity, and in water, they form into something with a high water affinity. From all this information, Rentt wonders if he can become a vampire someday if he works hard enough, and even beyond that, if he could become a human again. Lorraine predicts that further evolution will involve more than just defeating monsters. Just like how he became a ghast by ingesting her flesh and blood, there must be some condition for becoming a vampire. There is so much they don't know, but Lorraine promises to help him along the way. Lorraine then gets down to business, as she needs to inspect Rentt's body, and she demands that he take his clothes off. She plans to use a magic item to take pictures of every inch of his body, and she even wants to cut some of it off. This crazy lady wants to see if he feels pain, and wants to test a whole bunch of other crazy stuff. She claims to have a little bit of common sense, so she decides to let him rest for the night before doing all her crazy experiments tomorrow. The next morning, Rentt states that he actually feels really good. The strange impulse he had the day before is gone, but he decides that he can't go back to the labyrinth with a messed up sword. Cope can't believe he ruined it already and explains that he can't repair it. Rentt explains that it got wrecked because he used divinity on it. But Cope points out that there aren't any enemies in the labyrinth of the moon's reflection that call for the use of divinity. Cope can't believe that Rentt ran into a giant skeleton, and is even more shocked when Rentt reveals that he found an unexplored area. Cope almost says Rentt's name by accident, but he catches himself, as he doesn't want Rentt to know that he knows his real identity. Rentt will like to explore the area, and Cope agrees that he can't let anyone explore it before him. The sword Rentt asked for isn't ready yet, so Cope decides to lend him a sword that's a bit better than the first one he borrowed him. Rentt is shocked, but Cope explains that he is one of his best customers. After Rentt leaves, he explains that he knew he wouldn't be able to fool Cope. Cope did give him a sword, so Rentt can't wait to go back to the labyrinth and evolve existentially. Rentt heads home and sees that Loris's tavern is doing well. Later, Lorraine combines a bunch of mildly poisonous things to create something so poisonous that it can even kill a red grizzly. Rentt watches nearby as he agrees to help her with her experiments, but he begins to question his decision. Rentt drinks the terrible-tasting concoction, and Lorraine credits him for being the first person in history to survive drinking it. Lorraine determines that poison doesn't affect Rentt, but other tests prove that healing herbs and potions do. Lorraine gets tired, but Rentt still barely needs to sleep at all. The problem is that he still has a faint desire for human flesh and blood. Rentt is then shocked when Lorraine gives him a vial of her own blood. She casts preservation magic on it so it won't go bad, and recommends that he drink it at regular intervals to keep himself from losing control again. Rentt is hesitant, but he gives it a taste, and it's delicious. One drop is enough to get rid of his craving, and he plans to make the vial last. Rentt explains that he will be going to the guild to get a job, but Lorraine reminds him that he will have to show his ID for that. Rentt doesn't think anyone will care if a random bronze rank adventurer shows up dressed the way he's dressed. But Lorraine reminds him that Rentt was well known and liked by the guild. He always helped others and took jobs no one else wanted. There was even talk of recruiting him to work at the guild, but Rentt doesn't believe it. The guild just never mentioned it because Rentt didn't seem like he was ready to retire from being an adventurer. They were correct, as Rentt has dreams of becoming a mythical class and doesn't plan on quitting. In order to go up a rank, Rentt needs to pass a test, and to take a test, he needs to prove himself. He needs to be the one taking the quests. But if the guild knows that Rentt is back, then they will start asking questions. Lorraine comes up with a brilliant idea and suggests that Rentt pretend to be someone else. Rentt goes to the guild, and she registers as a new adventurer. Sheila has him fill out a form, and Rentt thinks about how it's been 10 years since he filled it out last time. He didn't know what counted as a skill back then, and only knew how to write down his name and age on the form. It was super long ago, but Rentt's goal hasn't changed. A look back at the rest of their conversation shows that Rentt was hesitant about pretending to be someone else. Lorraine explained that it would be the best way since no one would question what a wandering adventure looked like. However, the cost will be that Rentt will lose his accomplishments, and he will have to start over from iron rank. Rentt didn't care, as he was determined to become Mythro at all costs. For some reason, Rentt decides to only change his last name, so Sheila points out that some other adventurer named Rentt went missing recently. Rentt says he knows about this other Rentt, and it's because Lorraine told him he lies by saying that he's related to her and she's letting him stay at her house. There have been rumors about a strange man going in and out of her home, so she is glad to finally meet him. Rentt is glad that he came up with this lie, since he doesn't want crazy rumors going around about Lorraine. The name Rentt is a common one, and no one will question why a wandering adventurer dresses the way he does, so Rentt is glad that he can finally start over. Sheila gives him his adventurer's ID and asks him not to get himself killed. Rentt returns to the Labyrinth, where he hears people fighting goblins. They sound like children, and he finds that they are a swordsman and a healer. They are clearly new adventurers, but they seem to be working well together. Rentt leaves them, as they will be fine, and he thinks about how we can't help newcomers anymore like he used to, because he will probably just scare them away. Rentt doesn't want anyone else to find the unexplored area, so he rushes to it. He plans to explore it so he can report it to the guild. Not only is it valuable, but it would be a huge accomplishment for the new adventurer. Rentt goes further into the newly discovered area and finds himself in a strange room. Some bears fall apart, and Rentt discovers that someone is strangely living inside the labyrinth. Before Rentt can touch some flowers, he's shocked to hear someone speak to him. Rentt turns to find a woman behind him, and she wants to know what he is doing there. Rentt can tell that she has bad news, and he explains that he was just searching to see if anything was there. This lady correctly points out that he would be stealing, which she assumes means that he's prepared to die there. She refuses to forgive him for this, saying that she cannot allow this place to be disturbed. Rentt must prepare for danger, and this lady launches a powerful attack against him. Rentt's clothes are destroyed, and he can barely stand up. This girl is shocked by his appearance, but she realizes that it explains why he's in this place and concludes that she was mistaken. She thinks Rentt must be upset after she burned his clothes, but he thinks about how he's more upset that she almost killed him. She gives Rentt her cloak and asks him to keep this special place a secret. She doesn't want him to tell the guild, but then explains that no one can actually enter this place unless he is with them. Rentt is confused by all this, and she decides to give him something, as adventurers don't like leaving places empty-handed. She gives him something called the Acacia map, but Rentt sees that it's blank. The girl explains that it's a magic item that will automatically record the spaces through which the owner has traveled. Their trade is complete, so she prepares to send them back to the entrance. She wishes him good health, but realizes that it's not the best thing to say to him and teleports him out. At home, Lorraine can't believe how many strange things have been happening to Rentt. She explains that the map seems safe to use, but it didn't respond to her magic. It responds to Rentt, and it makes a map of the labyrinth of the moon's reflection. There is a strange mark on it that turns out to be the names Rise and Laura when he touches it. They are the kids he saw in the labyrinth, which shockingly means that he's able to see the names of the people inside as well as their positions. This is an incredible item, and the Shack Lorraine would even consider it a national treasure. Rentt is also able to change it into a map of another labyrinth he has been to, but this one is incomplete. This is because, as the owner, it only shows the spaces he has explored. Rentt wants Lorraine to check the cloak, but she points out that it probably isn't cursed since he's already wearing it without any problems. From the look of it, it has extremely strong magic resistance, and no blade can penetrate it. It's stronger than any armor, so Lorraine wonders who this woman could have been. She was incredibly powerful, and at Trent's current level of strength, he can only say that she's at least stronger than a gold class. Lorraine wonders about the strange room he went to, and Rentt explains that he will be going back to the labyrinth tomorrow. Lorraine reminds him that he was almost killed, but Rentt points out that the lady never told him not to go back. She just told him not to tell the guild. Lorraine says that the lady obviously wants to be left alone, but our boy plans to clear things up by talking to her. The next day, Rentt returns to the Labyrinth and thinks about his current situation while fighting a skeleton. Most people would take pity on him if they knew what he had been, but Rentt doesn't see things that way. From his perspective, he has fought powerful enemies, encountered a bunch of mysteries, and gotten stronger. These are all just the types of things that Mythro-class adventurers do. Rentt then finds that the entrance is gone and realizes that the girl doesn't want him returning. He determines that this can't be it and thinks that she just doesn't want him coming back right now. At the guild, some side character wonders where Rentt is and hope he's okay. Sheila thinks about how a lot of people learn to be adventurers from Rentt, and even she learned how to be a guild employee because of him. She thinks back to when they first met and is startled when new Rentt appears. New Rentt wants to take a job that requires gathering 3 bodies worth of orc. Flesh orcs are quite strong, so she can't recommend them for an iron-class adventurer. Rentt already knows that it would take at least a strong bronze rank adventurer to defeat just one, but he explains that he has already defeated orcs several times. Sheila decides to trust his decision and just tells him that if things get too dangerous, then he needs to run away. Rentt accepts her condition as he acknowledges that he only has one life and thinks about how he understands that better than anyone. Rentt returns after completing his first job as new Rentt and thinks about how a magic bag is a necessity for a solo adventurer like him. It took him 5 years to save up the money for it, but it was well worth it. Our boy Rentt has properly dressed and preserved the orc meat, so she lists him, and a client will be pleased. The job is complete, and word is already beginning to spread about how fast new Rentt took down 3 orcs all by himself. They wonder who this new guy is, and Rentt realizes that he might be sticking out a bit too much as a rookie iron class. Shayla returns, and Rentt is shocked to see that her manager has suggested that he take the promotion exam. It's rare for someone to get this opportunity so soon after registering, but they think new Rentt has potential. If he passes, Rentt will become bronze class, so he accepts. Lorraine is glad to hear the good news, but Rentt just credits this new body of his. Lorraine tells him not to sell himself short, as he is the one capable of controlling that body. Lorraine is pretty disappointed to hear that he named his new self Rentt Vivi because that's her family name, and it could raise suspicion. Rentt points out how a strange man hanging out in her house would create a lot of rumors, so it was better he pretended to be her relative. Lorraine accepts this answer, but she also tells him not to worry about her reputation. She is just a broke academic who came to this town because she couldn't make it to the capital. She doesn't care what people think of her, but Rentt rather than cause her any trouble. Lorraine points out that our boy does all the cooking, washing, and cleaning, so she owes him more than he owes her. Rentt, he doesn't think that's even close to being true, since he's only still human because of her. These words touch Lorraine, and she offers to let Rentt stay with her as long as he would like. There is nothing wrong with imposing on family, so he takes her up on her offer. The next day, Rentt arrives at the guild, ready for his exam. Sheila is shocked that he came so soon, since she thought he would wait for the next one so he could have time to study. The next one is several months from now, and there's no way he's going to wait that long. Some lazy adventurer arrives late after staying up watching too many unruly anime videos, and Rentt thinks about how that guy will lose points. An adventurer who can't show up on time isn't trustworthy and probably will fail the exam. The first part of the exam will test the adventurer's knowledge. They will be quizzed on the guild rules and the proper handling of monster drops. Only those that pass will be able to move on to the practical portion of the exam. Their practical changes every time, and Rentt thinks about how it was gathering herbs when he first took it. The writing test begins, and Rentt recognizes the young girl from the Labyrinth named Laura. Her friend isn't there, so Rentt assumes that he's taking the verbal exam. It's rare for normal people to be able to read and write, so Rentt was lucky to learn it in his village. He also learned everything necessary for this test, so it should be a piece of cake. Afterwards, the unruly anime fan can't believe how hard the test was, but Rentt is told that he received the perfect score. That's extremely rare, but Rentt is just glad that he passed. Rentt wonders what the practical will be, so Sela tells him that he will form a party with a few of the others and carry out a job for the guild. Rentt is partied up with Rise and Laura, and Rise quickly explains that he is a swordsman who uses spirit energy to raise his strength when he fights. Laura is a mage and can use healing magic. Participants are told that the job will take place in the Labyrinth of the New Moon. and their job will be to reach the point written on their map. They are all given the same spot on the map, and they have until sunset. The first party to arrive will receive a reward befitting their efforts, and everyone quickly realizes that this is a race. Rise brags about having gone to the Labyrinth of the New Moon before, but Laura embarrasses him when she reveals that they have only gone in part way. He is shocked when Rentt stops them from going in, and when Rentt suggests that they buy a map, they point out that they were already given a map by the guild. But Rentt says that that map is 15 years old. This map isn't very reliable, so the others are shocked that the guild tried to trick them. They couldn't trick our half-dead protagonist, however, so he goes to buy a map. They can't afford the 2 silver price tags, but Rentt points out that they only need the map of the first floor. The merchant realizes that there is no foolproof rent and sells them the first floor map for 5 bronze coins. This new map shows way more of the labyrinth and even has the trap locations on it. The merchant can tell that Rentt knows what he's doing and tells the youngins to do what he says. Laura wonders why the guild would give them outdated maps, and Rentt points out that the carriages could have even taken them to the wrong place. An adventurer can never let their guard down, and the point of the exam is to see if they have what it takes to be an adventurer. They encounter skeletons immediately after entering the labyrinth, and Rentt tells the others not to let their guard down just because they are low-level monsters. The youngins show just how skilled they are by destroying several skeletons, and Rentt thinks about how they are pretty good for their age. They have well-defined roles, so neither of them is doing too much for the other. Rentt helps a bit, and the battle is over. They notice that there are more monsters there than usual, so Rentt determines that they are being led there. He finds the incense responsible for attracting the monsters and reveals that there is an ambush up ahead. None of the monsters there should have that level of intelligence, but Laura is shocked when Rentt reveals that they are not monsters. Rise can't believe that they will have to fight humans, so our boy Rentt takes the lead. Rentt blocks the initial attack, but Rise wanted to take him. Rentt lets the kid take the first guy, and he amazes Rise with his dodging skills. Rentt absolutely wrecks the archer and doesn't even give the mage a chance to do anything. Laura helps Rise get the upper hand with the blinding light, and Rentt determines that they don't need his help. This becomes even more clear when the youngins show off their teamwork and defeat the bald dude. Rise points out that these guys were taking the exam as well and tried to make them fail. The examiner did say they can do anything to win, and Rentt explains that monsters won't be their only threat. An adventurer can never let their guard down, and Rise surprisingly states that they will obey Rentt orders from now on. As they leave, Rentt tells the person hiding to pick up the garbage, and the guy is shocked that Rentt knew he was even there. This dude explains that the guy with the mask seemed to know that they were sent by the guild, and they all wonder who he is. The guy who was hiding has an idea of who he might be and thinks about how his sister may have been right. At the guild, Sheila goes to meet the coolest-looking guildmaster around. Sheila is in charge of the new adventure Rentt Vivia, and the guildmaster wants to talk about some rumors he has been hearing. People have started to say that he is a criminal since he showed up out of nowhere and is very skilled. They don't know anything about his past, but the guildmaster concedes that every adventure has something in their past. They can't just ignore the accusations, however, so he instructs Sheila to inform him if she learns anything about new Rentt. Back in the labyrinth, our group has nearly reached its destination. In front of them is one of several boss rooms on this floor, and there's no way to get to the destination except by going through it. The youngins have never fought a boss, as it's not something the Iron class can handle. Rise gets offended when Rentt wonders if he is scared, but Rentt explains that there's no shame in avoiding a fight you can't win. Some other examines arrive, and Laura is shocked when Rentt says that it's perfect timing. This group insults our heroes by calling them a bunch of weirdos, but Rentt doesn't appreciate being talked to that way. These guys overstep the line by turning their attention to Laura, but Rise comes to her defense. The guys keep pressing the issue, so Rentt threatens them. They try to say that they were just joking, but our boy Rentt doesn't have much of a sense of humor. The leader says that they can just go first, but Rentt allows them to go ahead since he wants his team to get some rest. The guys enter the room and obnoxiously talk about how Rentt was dumb for letting them go first. Rise is upset, since letting them go first will mean they will lose, but Laura has already learned not to doubt our boy. Rise assumes that Rentt wants them to see what a boss fight looks like first, but that isn't all. Just then, they hear the first group scream in agony, and they get carried out of the room. Rentt explains, the guild employees rescued the party of idiots, so even if they lose, they won't die. Rentt wanted them to see this so the young kids would feel more comfortable, and he reiterates that there's no shame in avoiding a fight you can't win. Rise thinks about if he runs here, he probably won't ever come back. This means he will never become a real adventurer, so he asks Laura if she will follow him into battle. Laura agrees, and Rentt determines that this kid has finally made his decision. An adventurer who has been broken once becomes weak. It's not rare for them to quit. Rise was able to sense that and has chosen not to run. That is a very important part of what it takes to become an adventurer. So they all head into the boss's room. I appreciate you viewing my anime recap, Unruly Family. Please let me know what you think about the Unwanted Undead Adventurer by liking, sharing, subscribing, and leaving a comment.
Doesn't